According to the Huffington Post, the most obvious measure of a citizen's participation in the democratic process is voter turnout. The total number of Americans that are eligible to vote is over 200 million. The total number of voting eligible population of Americans that actually voted in the 2012 election is less than 58%. Today I will discuss the importance of voting and briefly cover some negative opinions that people have when it comes to voting. I hope to persuade you to vote in the 2016 presidential election. So let's begin with some facts about voting. In 1776, the Founding Fathers gave voting rights to certain citizens. Throughout the years, minority voters were allowed voting rights as well through the 15th and the 19th Amendments. Even though citizens have been given legal rights to vote for presidential candidates, the percentage of people that actually vote has fluctuated in recent years. According to the United States Election Project, in 2008, 61% of the voting eligible population voted, and in 2004, only 60% of the voting eligible population voted. And in my visual aid, it shows a graph of the voting population. In 2000, 54.2% of the voting population actually voted. In 2004, 60% of the population voted. In 2008, 61% of the population voted, and in 2012, only 58% voted, like I stated earlier. MassVote.com says that if a community is active in voting, constituents will make frequent visits to the area in hopes of improving their popularity. When elected officials pay attention to a community, they are more aware of the needs of the community of that area and will be an advocate for that community during the congressional sessions. If the community is not strong in voting turnout, the constituents will be less likely to visit the certain areas and try and make improvements. The underlying question remains, is voting a privilege, a right, or a responsibility of the people? Fairvote.org explains that when the American people think of democracy, they usually stress the importance of the right to vote, when in all actuality, the First Amendment does not give any constitutional protections of the citizens when it comes to voting. The website poses the question, should voting be a privilege, a right, or a responsibility? The first thought is that voting as a privilege. Should voting be considered a privilege that only few are allowed? Many Americans have lost sight in the fact that voting is a privilege and that only developed countries have, yet Americans continue to have low voter turnout. Secondly, the right to vote is viewed by most Americans as a legal guarantee by the government. Many believe that they have the right to vote even if they never actually vote. Lastly, the responsibility is the combination of a right and as a privilege to vote. Citizens need to be held accountable for what they can control, which is voting for the President of the United States. I believe that voting is a responsibility because we are given the privilege and the right to speak our minds by putting into action our opinions by voting for elected officials. There are many reasons why people do not vote. A Huffington Post article states that there is an absence of trust in the government. People do not trust government officials because of corruption. Secondly, a lack of general interest in politics. In general, our society is very apathetic if it does not directly affect them. Lastly, the convenience of actually voting. People live very busy lives and do not want to try and fit the process of voting into their very busy schedules. One solution to increasing the percentage of voter turnout is increasing the understanding of the voter. In order to increase the understanding of the voter, Fairvote.org states that the best way to increase voter turnout is to get rid of the Electoral College and make it so every state is as equally valuable as each other, not just the states that carry heavy weight in the current system. Despite the trend in lower voter turnout, the positive reasons for voting in this presidential election far outweigh the negative reasons. In conclusion, we are now aware of the importance of voting in the next presidential election. FDR once was quoted for saying, "Nobody will ever deprive the American people of voting except for the American people, and the only way that they can do that is by not voting." There are over 40% of registered voters that do not feel the need to vote. Lewis Lamore once said, "To make democracy work, we must have a nation of participants and not simply observers. One who does not vote has no right to complain." I agree with this quote because society is quick to complain, but they are not willing to be active participants when elected officials are voted into office. We need to remind ourselves that our voice does matter, and it is our responsibility to exercise our right to vote, and that is our founding fathers fought for.